So we're here with Rob, who is a member of the SNP, and we want to talk to him about his feelings towards the election. So clearly, I'm guessing you're swaying towards a yes vote in the referendum.
Yes.
Yeah. And can you just talk to me about how you came up with that as why you're voting for that, your belief behind it?
Well, I think the current union is allied to a very out-of-date construct that was originally built around empire building and has really been out of date for about 100 years now, ever since World War I finished. And the real problem has been the UK has been unable to transition out of that very quickly. And behind that, Scotland as a nation has slightly distinct social and cultural characteristics from England, but the way it can actually express these and take them further into a separate identity has been held back, principally because it doesn't have the economic or the political powers to do so. So it's really about an opportunity, almost a once-in-a-generation opportunity, to effect a shift in that, and the only opportunity that's going to come is really this independence vote. It's not exactly the ideal time to have had it, because, to be fair, I think the SNP wanted longer to show their own competence as part of devolved government before they then wanted to put the question. But I don't think even they predicted that the 2010 election was going to have the outcome it did. I don't think they predicted that the Scottish election was going to come with the outcome that it did in terms of an absolute majority in the Scottish Parliament. So these things come along once in a while, not all the time you expect them, but without that absolute majority there was no way they could maybe get the legislation through for a referendum vote. So they had to grab the opportunity when they could, and it is a once in a lifetime opportunity, certainly for me. There might be another one along in a few generations' time, but I won't be part of it. So I want to be part of this process, and if possible, get the best outcome for Scotland, which is a yes vote.
Okay. Do you feel that what you see for a future of Scotland with the changing of the system from the imperial way that we've set up before, do you think that's impossible with the union as it stands at the moment?
I think so, because at present the whole economic policy of the UK government, whether it's coloured by the Tories or Labour, is really around keeping the home county's economy in balance. And if that means continually having to feed housing bubbles that then bust and then have to be reinflated again, then so be it as far as they're concerned in terms of maintaining their political dominance. So that holds Scotland back in many ways, because the economies of the southeast of England and Scotland are just simply different, have different dependencies. So in order to get some levers around that economic power, I think we need a separate political settlement, and that settlement comes with independence.
Sure. One thing that I've kind of noticed in an awful lot of the debates and conversations that I've heard on the subject, there seems to be an old school kind of left and right mentality on some of the voters. So for example, there's a lot of talk of being against privatisation, securing the NHS as a public body, things like that. Does that come into your thinking when you come to the vote?
No, because I think some of these things are used to pollute the debate in many ways. I don't think there's a left-right split about independence. I think it's largely a cultural split regarding people who are already wealthy and doing well out of the existing system, want to maintain that system, will throw various issues in to try and sway people towards their point of view. I think what the people of Scotland really want to do when they actually go into that ballot box on the 18th September is to say, what kind of a country do I want to live in? Do I want to have a government that I actually have voted for? Do I want to have a fairer distribution of wealth across the country than it is just now? Do I want my children educated free at the point of delivery? Do I want to have more local delivery in terms of services? And I don't just mean a separate Scottish NHS and a separate and the council doing everything for me. Do I want a greater degree of localism in how I can influence the environment where I live? Because it's not all about the central belt in Scotland in terms of Glasgow, Edinburgh. There are separate and vibrant communities in Scotland in the north, and the northwest in particular, that are being held back by the current system because of their relative isolation and rurality. And I don't think we'll get any change in that direction without levers of power more concentrated in Scotland and being able to influence that greater degree of equality and greater degree of local democracy in the system. And I see independence the main catalyst on that.
When it comes to currency, there's obviously nothing been set in stone about currency at this stage. How do you see the future of Scotland and a currency? For example, either keeping the pound, either they're having an agreement where it's unofficial or official with the UK government, or maybe moving to a separate currency, or moving further on from there. For example, if you want to join the EU, you would have to take the euro. So how are your feelings about that?
Well, I go back to my old economic lectures when they talked about money, and they used to describe money is what money does. And all that money is, effectively these days, is a medium of exchange, or in terms of transactions. In the UK, the pound is no longer a store of value, because if you have a nation that has a 1.4 trillion debt, it can't possibly be a store of value, so it's only a means of exchange. Now, what I've seen a shift in policy, certainly within the SNP, between Scotland and Europe, Scotland having the euro, and then Scotland keeping the pound. And I don't necessarily see there's a conflict between those areas, because you can have, or you can envisage, a position where you keep the pound, allow the normal transaction processes to be maintained after independence. But then you can take a view about whether or not you realise who your major trading partners are and shape your currency policy around that. Now, it might be with Europe. It might be sharing the responsibility in the economic and taxation policies with whatever's thought up in Angela Merkel's kitchen, or it might be we have to maintain the large majority of our transaction values with the South and England, because a lot of our major transactions are with them just now. So there's a major economic choice about this, but it isn't about politicians standing up and saying, no, you can't use the pound because it's ours. It's a UK asset, and after the 18th September vote, I think we'll have a proper sit down and discussion about what works, not only just for Scotland but for the rest of the UK and its commercial interests.
Let's go on to national debt. Obviously, at this stage, there is a whopping amount of debt in the UK. Scotland at the moment is part of that union, and therefore there is a feeling that there will be responsibility for an independent Scotland to take part of that debt. Mm-hmm. Now, it's been referred to as a divorce, and in many divorces it gets messy. Do you think that Scotland would get a fair deal on the amount of debt, and do you think that could affect Scotland's future? I mean, I'm kind of saying that potentially you might get screwed over by Westminster.
I think if you're going to have, I wouldn't describe it as a divorce. I would maybe describe it in Coldplay terms as a conscious uncoupling. I think that's part of a number of negotiations about the split of the current UK national assets and national liabilities. I mean, the global debt for the UK is 1.4 trillion. So it's how that's split over the Scotland and the remainder of the UK will be part of a negotiated process, as will the split of the assets. So yes, I expect there to be a negotiation. I expect there to be negotiation in a spirit of mutual trust and respect, and I expect the outcome to be one which the people of Scotland can be satisfied that the deal is satisfactory. I'm sure the people who are going to be batting for Scotland will do so effectively and under best advice.
The talk of the Scottish economy and how it will move forward in the future. there is, I've heard the S&P mention oil a lot, and the counter argument for that is that oil prices fluctuate greatly. Do you think that the Scottish economy would have to be reliant on that oil, or do you think that there is an economy here that can be built on over the future that will be stronger?
Well, there's two arms to this. The first arm is that Scotland is wholly reliant on the hydrocarbon business in the northeast, and the answer to that, it isn't. And even without oil, it would have a similar GDP per head than the rest of the UK. So the sort of dependence on hydrocarbons argument isn't there, and even if it was, in the long term, that isn't sustainable. And even though the wealth of the North Sea is still substantially still in the ground, they reckon there's about half of the overall resource still left, more inaccessible, but with better technologies improving all the time, it can be accessed and continue to generate wealth. There's a debate about how that wealth is harnessed and utilised for the betterment of the community, as opposed to how it's been squandered away over the last 50 years or so under Westminster. But the real issue for us is looking forward into the future. That's a finite resource. We are going to have to use more alternatives, such as wind and wave power. We have been described as the Saudi Arabia of renewables. If we can't get into ourselves to harness that resource effectively, then no one ever will. So there is a sustainable future for Scotland's economy. It is not necessarily bound to oil, and the real opportunity for independence is to make sure we can harness that future for ourselves.
I've heard a lot of people talking about the vote, and a lot of let's say non-politically minded people, when they've been asked to vote, I've heard the expression head and heart an awful lot. Which way will you be voting in September?
Both, in a way, because I mean, having rehearsed the arguments about whether or not we'd be better off or worse off, I think the debate's moved on now from where it was, say, when the independence campaign commenced. As far as I'm concerned, it really commenced about 2 years ago, when we actually started calling the date of the referendum. And over the last year and a bit, what we've been trying to wipe away are these arguments that we were too wee, too poor and too stupid. And I think those arguments have now been well and truly put to bed by now. So I think the logic has been dealt with. The emotion around this, if it can be called that, is really about deciding what kind of country do you want, and how do you want it to be viewed at by the rest of the world. If you want to be viewed as an out-of-date imperial nation which clings to its past very expensively through holding things like nuclear weapons, which we will not be able to use anyway, and spending huge amounts of resource trying to maintain. Or do you want a future where there's a greater spread of equality, which makes the kind of jealousy of wealth and power a thing of the past? If you want a lot of resource developed into trying increasing our economic vibrancy by bringing more women into the workforce because we have got better childcare arrangements in Scotland, and if we also want to have a greater degree of local involvement in decisions that affect people by increasing the amount of local democracy we have in the system. Scotland has a very centralised system of local democracy built by 32 councils for 5.5 million people. In Denmark, for the same population, there's 270. I think they have shown, particularly in the Nordic arena, that they can influence the way in which their society develops in a much better way without having had the potential advantages of the old imperial context. They've done it themselves without that advantage and developed the nation themselves from the ground up. And this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Scotland to do the same.
The Scandinavian countries, I've heard also obviously a lot of similarities between the Scandinavian countries and Scotland, how their economies could potentially work. Do you think that but obviously they have much higher taxes in there, do you think tax rises would be something that would be an inevitability for an independent Scotland?
Well, in Norway, no one pays state taxes above the income of £35,000 a year, below the income of £35,000 a year. So I don't think that the overall tax burden as a proportion of GDP is very much different, but the way in which it is spread is substantially different. The wealthy pay far less tax relatively than the Nordic countries, and what they've been able to achieve through a greater spread of that tax burden throughout the whole population is a much greater self-sufficiency in the local people and vibrancy. And I think that's something to be admired and something to be aspired to. And I think that's why Scotland should be seeing itself more as a sort of on the horizon of the Nordic countries than the northern hinterland of the home counties.
Defence. Obviously, this would mean the breaking up of large sections of the British military as it stands at the moment, because there's a lot of military investment, let's call it, has gone in with Trident, Scottish regiments, things like that. Do you think that a Scottish army would be something that would stay at the same level? Would it increase or decrease? Like, how do you see defence of Scotland?
Well, Scotland will have different defence priorities than the UK, and those priorities don't extend to nuclear installations. I mean, the nuclear installation was always seen as some kind of expensive insurance policy for the UK, and over the last few decades, it's been demonstrated that the UK has very little control on how that is used. It could not use it without the approval or agreement of the Americans. And in any emergency scenario such as that, there will not be the time to ask permission or get refusal. So the answer is it's simply not going to be used. So why have it? It's a bluff game that everyone knows. It's never. I think Russian, Chinese, whoever it might be, as the potential enemy, don't really think it would be used either. So for Scotland, it's an irrelevancy that also happens to be highly dangerous because it's 30 miles away from the city. So what Scotland's needs are really they centre around maritime defence and its installations. Scotland's got a huge coastline. It's got offshore installations at present that are highly valuable, and really the defence needs of the nation will feature around that, and has to be a limited contribution to what it can do to secure international peace across the rest of the world. So that's where Scotland's priorities sit. I would hope that in independent Scotland we could actually then rebalance these priorities and arrange for a suitable transition for the nuclear installations from this country.
Do you see, how do you see Scotland's future relating to, for example, NATO or the UN or Europe itself as a economic group?
Well, that really depends on the nature of NATO. I think NATO suits Scotland to some extent in the fact that there's a wide degree of collaboration in the area of maritime defence around the North Sea and the North Atlantic. So there are interests to be served by being part of that organisation. There are plenty of organisations in NATO that are also non-nuclear. So the linking of NATO and the nuclear power option simply for me isn't viable. So I was at the debate at the SNP conference when they actually had the vote, and what impressed me more than anything else was the maturity of the debate, the passion on both sides, and the acceptance of the eventual decision that was made as what was in the country's best interests. That made me very proud to be a member of both the SNP and a Scot.
What would you say to any? Because, like I said, a lot of the people that were spoken today are kind of torn down the middle. They're kind of really unsure of which way they're going to vote, and it seems like genuinely they're very confused about it. What would you say to anyone that was undecided at this stage before the vote? Now we're 2 months away.
I would say I feel your pain. I would say it's very difficult to make up your mind when, for generations, you've been part of a country that's been worn down by the baggage of the past in terms of the imperial context, the way in which there's been an apparent lack of empowerment by not being able to influence change because you don't get the government you actually vote for, which has happened several times in Scotland. And it's not surprising for me that people say either opt out or to go, maybe it's nah, maybe it's aye, maybe it's no, I'll just do what I's been, and accept that. And if they're happy with that, I can accept they'll be happy with that, and go on with it. But I think there's a growing number who are saying to themselves that, I think we need to change as a nation, and if England can't come with us, then so be it. Let's forge a nation that we can be proud of and set its proper role in the world.